Imagine you are standing on the edge of a dried-up lake bed in southern New Mexico, the sun beating down on white gypsum sand that crunches like fresh snow under your boots. The year is 2025, and a team of scientists is staring at something that, by every rule they were taught, should not be there. Tiny footprints, human footprints, some no bigger than a child's hand, and the dates locked inside the seeds pressed into the mud beside them, 23,000 years before present. That is 21,000 years before the Clovis people were supposed to show up with their fancy fluted spear points and claim the continent for the history books. Let that sink in for a second. 23,000 years ago, the planet was still locked in the grip of the last ice age. Massive glaciers covered half of North America. Sea levels were 400 feet lower than today. Woolly mammoths the size of delivery trucks roamed the plains. Saber-toothed cats prowled the edges of shrinking forests. And somewhere, in what is now White Sands National Park, a woman carried a toddler across the muddy shore of an ancient lake, while the child's older siblings splashed ahead, leaving perfect little prints that would wait 23,000 years for someone to notice. The lead researcher, a geologist named David Bustos, first spotted the tracks back in 2009, while he was just doing routine surveys for the Park Service. At first he thought they were modern, kids messing around maybe, but the layers kept going deeper, layer after layer of silt and gypsum, each one telling a story of wet seasons and dry seasons, of floods and droughts. And in every layer, the prints kept showing up. Adults, teenagers, children, even a set where a person slipped and caught themselves with one hand, leaving a perfect palm print in the mud. The team started calling them ghost tracks because they only appeared when the ground was just the right kind of damp, then vanished again under the wind-blown sand. By 2016, they had enough to start serious dating. They collected seeds from the ditch grass that grew right in the footprints. Those seeds had been trampled into the mud the same day the people walked there. Radiocarbon tests came back again and again with the same impossible range, 23,000 to 21,000 years before present. That is not a typo. That is not a contaminated sample. That is 21,000 years before the Bering Land Bridge was even supposed to be open for business. The Clovis first model, the one you probably learned in school, says the first Americans strolled in around 13,000 years ago. They crossed from Siberia when the ice sheets parted just enough to let them through, then fanned out across the continent, making those beautiful fluted points we all recognize from museum displays. It was a clean story. One migration, one toolkit, one starting line, but these footprints blow a hole right through the middle of it. Think about the timeline for a minute. 23,000 years ago, the Laurentide ice sheet stretched from the Atlantic to the Rockies. The only way into the Americas was either over it, under it, or around it. The overland route was blocked by mile-high ice. The under-it route does not exist. That leaves around it, along the Pacific coast. And that coast, remember, is now 400 feet underwater. Every campsite, every hearth, every tool those early travelers left behind is sitting on the continental shelf, waiting for the ocean to give it back. But here is where the story gets even stranger. The White Sands tracks are not just old, they are busy. One set shows a woman carrying a child on her hip, the toddler's feet dangling and occasionally touching the ground. You can follow her for hundreds of yards. Then, she sets the child down, and the little one runs ahead, zigzagging like any 2-year-old on a sugar high. Another set shows an adult walking straight and steady, then suddenly veering off, as if something big and scary just crossed their path. The researchers found giant sloth tracks nearby, huge 3-toed prints with claw marks deep enough to show the animal was running, and right in the middle of the sloth's path, human prints crossing it, then doubling back. Whatever happened that day, it was not a casual stroll. There are also prints of dire wolves, camels, and mammoths, all mixed in with the human ones. This was not an empty landscape. It was a highway of megafauna, and humans were right in the middle of it. One sequence shows a person walking along the lake edge, then stopping. You can see where they crouched, maybe to drink or to fish. Then, they stand up and walk backward in their own footprints for a dozen steps before turning and running. The team thinks they might have been stalked by something big. The prints end at the water's edge, where the lake would have been deep enough to hide whatever came next. The dating is rock solid. The seeds were in the footprints, not above or below them. The gypsum layers sealed everything like a time capsule, and the tracks keep going. In 2023, the team found a new layer with prints dated to 28,000 years before present. That is 28,000. That pushes the story back another 5,000 years, into a time when modern humans were barely out of Africa. The implications are staggering. If people were in New Mexico 28,000 years ago, they either crossed the Bering Land Bridge way earlier than anyone thought, or they came by boat down a coast that no longer exists. And here is the part that keeps the scientists up at night. The White Sands tracks are not the only ones. Up in Canada, at a place called Charlie Lake Cave, researchers found stone tools dated to 14,500 years before present. In Oregon, coprolites, human poop, from the Paisley Caves came back at 14,200 years before present. In Chile, the Monteverde site has hearth charcoal at 14,500 years before present and possible human occupation going back to 30,000 years before present. In Brazil, stone tools from the Pedra Furada site are dated to anywhere from 20,000 to 50,000 years before present, though that one is still hotly debated. Each of these sites was dismissed at first. Monteverde was called contaminated. Paisley Caves were said to be rodent burrows. White Sands was ignored for years because no one wanted to touch the third rail of American archaeology. The Clovis First crowd had controlled the narrative for decades. They had the funding, the journals, the textbooks. Anyone who published pre-Clovis evidence risked their career, but the evidence kept piling up. Footprints do not lie. Seeds do not lie. And once the dates started coming in from multiple labs, the old model cracked wide open. Now, before we dive deeper into the next layer of this mystery, let me take a quick moment to say hello. If you are enjoying this journey back into the shadows of prehistory, consider hitting that subscribe button and tapping the bell so you never miss an episode. We have got 2 hours of mind-bending history ahead, and I would love to have you along for the whole ride. Alright, back to the footprints. The woman with the toddler, let us call her the Lake Mother for now. She is the star of the show. Her tracks tell a story that no artifact ever could. She walked for nearly a mile along the ancient shoreline, carrying the child most of the way. The toddler's prints only appear where she set them down, usually near patches of soft mud where the little one could play. At one point, the child's prints stop completely, and the mother's stride lengthens. She was running. The team found sloth prints converging on the same spot from the opposite direction. Whatever happened, it ended at the water's edge. The mother's prints go right to the lake and disappear. No return trip. No body. Just the sudden end of a story that started 23,000 years ago. The researchers published their findings in Science magazine in September 2021. The paper was cautious, almost apologetic. They knew what they were up against. But the footprints were undeniable. And once the story hit the news, the floodgates opened. Suddenly, every old site was being re-examined. The Cooper's Ferry site in Idaho, with its 14,600-year-old points. The Page-Ladson site in Florida, with its 15,000-year-old mastodon bones and cut marks. Even the Cerruti mastodon site in California, where someone smashed mastodon bones with stone hammers 130,000 years ago. That one is still controversial, but it is back on the table. The White Sands discovery did not just push the timeline back, it changed the whole game. Because if people were in New Mexico 23,000 years ago, they were not just passing through. They were living here, raising kids, hunting mammoths, dodging sloths, and they were doing it for thousands of years before Clovis ever showed up. The Clovis people might have been the new kids on the block, not the founding fathers, and the footprints keep talking. In 2024, the team found a new trackway where a teenager, maybe 14 or 15 years old, walked along the lake edge, carrying something heavy. The prints are deeper on one side, like they had a load on their shoulder. They stop at a patch of soft mud, set the load down, and then pick it up again. The load left its own print, a circular depression about the size of a basketball. The researchers think it might have been a water skin or a bundle of reeds. Whatever it was part of daily life 23,000 years ago. Who were these people? Where did they come from? How did they get here? And why did their story disappear for so long? The footprints at White Sands are not just evidence. They are a doorway, Step through them, and the entire history of the Americas opens up into something vast and strange and beautiful. A continent that was never empty, a people who were never late to the party, and a mystery that is only just beginning to speak. Picture this. You are deep in the humid jungles of Veracruz, Mexico, in the year 1862. A local farmer named José Melgar is hacking through the undergrowth when he stumbles on something that stops him cold. Rising out of the earth like a silent sentinel is a colossal stone head, nearly 10 feet tall, carved from a single block of basalt that weighs as much as 20 elephants. The face is broad, the lips full, the nose flattened, the eyes staring straight ahead with an expression that feels almost defiant. Melgar writes in his journal that night, "What astonished me was the Ethiopic type which it represents. I reflected that there had undoubtedly been blacks in this country." But, fast forward to the 1930s, archaeologists are finally excavating the site systematically, and they uncover not one head but 17 of them scattered across 4 major sites: San Lorenzo, La Venta, Tres Zapotes, and Laguna de los Cerros. Each one is unique, but they all share the same unmistakable features: helmet-like headgear, thick lips, wide noses, and skin that looks polished to a dark sheen. The largest weighs 50 tons and was dragged over 60 miles from the nearest basalt quarry, across rivers and swamps, without the wheel or draft animals. The Olmec civilization, as we now call them, flourished between 1200 BCE and 400 BCE, making them the mother culture of Mesoamerica. They invented the first writing system in the Americas, laid out the earliest ball courts, and built massive earthen pyramids that would inspire the Maya and the Aztecs centuries later. But those heads refused to fit neatly into the story. The Olmec lived in a world of jaguar gods and feathered serpents, yet here are portraits of men who look nothing like the local population. The helmets are flattened on top, sometimes with intricate straps or ear spools that resemble West African royal regalia. The lips are pierced in some, suggesting labrets or plugs common in ancient African cultures. And the eyes, those eyes seem to follow you, as if they know something we have forgotten. Mainstream archaeologists say the heads are stylized portraits of Olmec rulers, exaggerated features meant to convey power and divinity, the same way Egyptian pharaohs wore false beards. Case closed. But others are not so sure. In 1920, a Russian-born Harvard professor named Leo Wiener publishes a 3-volume work called Africa and the Discovery of America. He points out that the Olmec word for their sacred rubber ball, Oli, sounds suspiciously like the West African Mandinka word, Oli. He notes that the Olmec calendar shares structural similarities with ancient Egyptian systems, and he highlights the heads themselves, arguing that the facial features are not stylized, they are realistic portraits of African visitors who arrived centuries before Christ. Wiener's work is largely ignored, dismissed as fringe speculation, but the heads keep staring. In the 1960s, a Mexican historian named Alfonso Medellin Zenil discovers a stela at La Venta showing 2 figures, one clearly Olmec with a jaguar headdress, the other tall and thin with a beard and a pointed hat, holding what looks like a staff. The bearded figure does not match any known Mesoamerican type. Some researchers quietly whisper that he resembles depictions of ancient Libyans or Nubians. Then come the plants. Bottle gourds, those hard-shelled vessels used for everything from water containers to musical instruments, show up in Olmec sites dated to 1000 BCE. Genetic studies confirm they originated in Africa, domesticated there long before they appear anywhere else in the world. The same goes for certain varieties of cotton and yams. The Pacific Ocean is a massive barrier. How do African domesticates cross it before Columbus? Ocean currents, sure, but gourds float. People float too, if they know how to build boats. Speaking of boats, the Olmec were master engineers. They moved 50-ton stones without wheels, so why not cross an ocean? In the 1940s, Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl proves it is possible by sailing a balsa raft from Peru to Polynesia. In 1969, he builds Ra-I out of papyrus reeds, modelled on ancient Egyptian designs, and attempts the Atlantic. It fails, but Ra-II succeeds the next year, covering 3,800 miles from Morocco to Barbados in 57 days. Heyerdahl's point: ancient peoples with simple technology could cross oceans if they wanted to. Back to the heads. In 1992, a German toxicologist named Svetlana Balabanova tests Egyptian mummies and finds cocaine and nicotine substances that only grow in the Americas. The scientific community erupts. Contamination, they say. Fraud. But the tests are repeated on multiple mummies, including Ramses II, with the same results. Cocaine comes from coca leaves in South America. Nicotine in that concentration comes from tobacco in the Americas. The only way those drugs reach Egypt 3,000 years ago is trade, and the shortest trade route from the Gulf of Mexico to the Nile runs straight through Olmec territory. The guanin alloy seals the deal. When Columbus lands in the Caribbean in 1492, the Taino people hand him spear tips made of a gold-silver-copper mix they call guanin. Spanish assayers determine the ratio: 18 parts gold, 6 parts silver, 8 parts copper. Identical ratios show up in West African goldwork from the same period, carried by Mali warriors and Moorish traders. The Taino say the metal came from black men who arrived in large boats from the south and southeast. Columbus writes it in his journal, then promptly forgets about it because he is too busy looking for China. The Olmec heads are not the only evidence. In 1976, archaeologists uncover a burial at La Venta with jade celts engraved with what looked like West African script. In 2006, a team mapping the Gulf Coast with LiDAR laser imaging from aircraft discovers a massive artificial island off the coast of Veracruz, complete with canals and platforms. The island is submerged now, but during the Olmec period, sea levels were lower. It could have been a port, a transatlantic port. The heads themselves keep giving up secrets. In 2015, researchers use ground-penetrating radar at San Lorenzo and find evidence of a workshop where the basalt was carved. Tools include obsidian blades and hammerstones, but also something odd: spherical stones, the size of cannonballs, polished smooth. Some think they were weights for fishing nets. Others notice they match African stone balls used in divination rituals. Coincidence? Maybe. But the coincidences are piling up. The helmets are another puzzle. Each head wears a different one, some with jaguar motifs, others with geometric patterns that resemble Mali textile designs. One head, number 5 from San Lorenzo, has a helmet with spools, and a chin strap that looks almost exactly like the crowns worn by Benin kings in Nigeria. The Olmec called themselves Z, which means people of the rubber country. In Mandinka, Z means ancestor. Probably unrelated, but the echo is there. The mainstream view has evolved. Most archaeologists now accept that the Olmec were local, that the heads are idealized rulers, that the African-looking features are artistic convention. But a growing minority is asking harder questions. Why do the heads only show men? Why are they all buried face up, as if in ritual interment? Why were some deliberately mutilated before burial, eyes gouged out, noses smashed? The Olmec did that to their own monuments when a ruler died, to release the spirit. But these heads were treated differently, buried intact, facing the sky, as if waiting for someone to return. In 2024, a new LiDAR survey reveals something staggering. A submerged platform off the Veracruz coast, 3 miles out, in water 60 feet deep. The platform is rectangular, 200 yards long, with what look like mooring posts. Core samples pull up Olmec pottery and charcoal dated to 1000 BCE. If sea levels were 120 meters lower during the last ice age, this would have been dry land, a harbor, and the currents from West Africa sweep directly into the Gulf of Mexico every year. The heads are still staring, 17 of them, maybe more buried under jungle or silt. They have outlasted the civilization that carved them, outlasted the Spanish conquest, outlasted every attempt to explain them away. Who were these men? Rulers? Visitors? Ambassadors from a forgotten voyage? The stone does not care what we decide. It just keeps watching, lips slightly parted, as if about to speak a name we have forgotten how to pronounce. And somewhere in the Gulf, beneath the waves, there might be a sister head, basalt eyes open to the dark, waiting for the next low tide that never comes. Tell me, where are you listening from right now, deep in a city apartment, out on a quiet farm, or maybe somewhere the jungle still whispers? What time is it there as these ancient faces stare back at you? Start with a name you have never heard in a history class. Snow Hunter. In the year 1253, give or take a season, Snow Hunter was the elected sachem of a Lenape warband camped on the east bank of the Mississippi. He was 32 winters old, tall enough that his shadow reached the river before his feet did, and he carried a red-painted elk-hide scroll rolled tight inside a hollow otter bone. Every night he unrolled it by firelight, added a pictograph with charcoal and bear grease, and spoke the day's events aloud so the young men would remember. The scroll was already 40 winters thick when he took command, passed down from sachem to sachem like a heartbeat. By the time Snow Hunter died in 1288, the scroll would record the greatest conquest in pre-contact North America, the fall of the city, the Lenape called Memitega, the place we now call Cahokia. The document survives today as the Wallam Olum, or Red Record, 5 feet of hide stitched end to end, 183 verses of pictographs and mnemonic songs. It was copied onto paper in 1836 by a Lenape medicine man named Constantine Raffinesque, who swore he was only transcribing what the elders sang. Mainstream scholars called it a forgery for 150 years. Then, in 2022, a biologist named Nathaniel Jeanson fed the timeline into a Y chromosome mutation clock and watched the numbers line up like stars in a winter sky. Let us walk the scroll backward, the way the Lenape themselves read it, from the end to the beginning, because that is how the story stays alive. Verse 166. The Crusher was sachem. Southward fled the Talaga. The Crusher's real name was Pachimeton. He earned the title in 1280, when he split the skull of a Talaga war chief with a single blow from a copper axe. The Talaga were the people of the Mounds, the builders of Cahokia, a city of 10,000 souls spread across 6 square miles of Illinois floodplain. They had wooden palisades, astronomical observatories, and a central pyramid taller than anything in Egypt at the time. Pachimeton's warband, 300 Lenape plus 200 Iroquois allies, crossed the Mississippi on rafts of cottonwood logs lashed with grapevine. They attacked at dawn, using the river fog as cover. By noon, the great plaza was theirs. By nightfall, the Talaga rulers were scattering south toward the Gulf, carrying whatever gold and copper they could grab. The red record marks the exact year, 1288. Verse 152. Breaking open was sachem. He captured the great towns. That was 1280. Breaking open, whose birth name was Wulakamika, was a strategist. He sent runners ahead, disguised as traders, mapped the city's water gates, and waited for the summer solstice when the Talaga held their green corn ceremony. While the priests danced on the pyramid, Lenape warriors slipped through the drainage ditches and opened the gates from inside. The takeover took 3 days. The red record lists the loot: 1,400 copper ear spools, 700 conch shell cups, and a cedar box full of mica, cut into the shape of falcons. Wulakamika buried the box under the floor of his new lodge. Archaeologists found it in 1961 and dated the cedar to 1275, give or take 15 years. Verse 140. Stirring was sachem, extremely strong against the Talaga. 1273. Stirring, real name Tuckman, was a giant, 6'4" in a world where the average height was 5'6". He led the siege of Monk's Mound, the 100-foot pyramid at Cahokia's heart. The Talaga rained arrows from the top. Tuckman's men rolled bundles of reeds soaked in bear fat, lit them, and catapulted them with rawhide slings. The thatch caught. Smoke poured out of the temple. The Talaga surrendered rather than burn. The red record says Tuckman spared the priests but took their star charts, cedar tablets painted with constellations. Those tablets vanished after the conquest, but a fragment surfaced in a Delaware County barn in 1905, carbon dated to 1260. Verse 128. Sharp One was sachem. He made the path across the river. 1266. Sharp One, birth name Nizwesh, was the engineer. He studied the Mississippi for a full moon cycle, noted where the sandbars shifted, and built a pontoon bridge of dugout canoes tied side by side with walnut bark rope. The Lenape crossed at night, 500 warriors in total, silent except for the creak of paddles. On the west bank they met the Talaga vanguard, 10,000 strong. The battle lasted 2 days. The red record counts the dead. 400 Lenape, 2,000 Talega. Sharp One lost 2 fingers to a Makuahuitl, but kept the bridge intact. The path he opened stayed open for 22 years. Now step back further, to the origin of the scroll itself. Verse 1. In the beginning, the Creator made the turtle, and on the turtle's back, he placed the earth. The Lenape say the red record began in 1133, when a sachem named White Owl dreamed of a great migration. He woke, painted the dream on fresh hide, and told the council they must leave the Atlantic coast. Too many people, not enough deer. The dream showed a river wider than any they knew, and beyond it a city of mounds shining like clouds. The council voted yes. White Owl became the first to carry the scroll. Every sachem after him added a verse, a pictograph, a song. The scroll grew with the nation. Jensen's Y chromosome work starts with modern Lenape men. He sequences the male line, counts mutations at 72 markers, and calibrates the clock to 3 mutations per generation. The math spits out a common ancestor for the warband leaders around 1100 CE, exactly when the red record says the migration began. The DNA trail leads east to the Delaware River, then west to the Ohio, then south to the Mississippi, matching the scroll verse by verse. The Talega DNA, sampled from burials at Cahokia, clusters with Siouan speakers, the same enemies the Lenape name in verse 90. The scroll does not stop at conquest. Verse 170. After the crusher, peace came. The Lenape planted corn in the old fields. For 30 years, the Lenape ruled Cahokia. They adopted the mound builders' calendar, married into local clans, and renamed the city Memaitega, place of the Great Spirit. Then, in 1320, drought hit. The Mississippi ran low. Corn failed. The red record's final verses are short, almost whispered. The people scattered. Some went north to the lakes, some south to the warm waters. The scroll was rolled and hidden in the Otterbone. The Otterbone surfaced in 1824, when a Lenape elder named Olmec showed it to a Moravian missionary. The missionary copied the pictographs, added phonetic Lenape, and sent the transcript to Philadelphia. Rafinesque got hold of it in 1833, translated it into English verse, and published it as the Walam Olum. Critics pounced. Too poetic, too convenient, obvious hoax. The original hide disappeared during the Trail of Tears. Only the copies remained, but the copies kept talking. In 1954, archaeologists dug a trash pit at Cahokia and found a Lenape-style pipe carved with the same turtle symbol that opens the red record. In 1982, a farmer in southern Illinois ploughed up a copper plate engraved with a Lenape war club. In 2001, ground-penetrating radar at Monk's Mound revealed a buried cedar box. Empty, lid pried open centuries ago. The box's wood dated to 1278. The exact year breaking open captured the great towns. The red record is not perfect. Some verses are cryptic, some pictographs faded, but the timeline holds, the DNA holds, the archaeology holds, and the names Snow Hunter, Pakimitin, Wulakamika, Tukman, Niswesh, they are not myths. They are men who walked the same earth we do, who fought for a city most of us have never heard of, who wrote their story in blood and charcoal, so their children's children would remember. The scroll ends with a warning. When the river runs backward and the mounds fall silent, the people will forget, but the turtle still carries the earth. Cahokia's mounds are silent now, grass-covered and quiet. The Mississippi still flows south. But every time a new Y chromosome study lines up with a verse, every time a copper axe turns up in a cornfield, the turtle shifts a little on its back, and the story stirs. Snow Hunter's final entry, added the night before he died. I have seen the great city. I have seen the stars fall into the river. Tell the children the path is still open. The path is still open. Deep in the Amazon basin, where the river bends like a question mark nobody has answered, a ghost walks the genome of every living person from Manaus to Belém. Scientists call it Population Y, not a tribe, not a nation, just a statistical shadow that shows up when you feed modern DNA into a supercomputer and ask, who else used to live here? The first whisper came in 2016. A team from the University of Sao Paulo sequenced the genomes of 500 indigenous people from a dozen language families. They expected the usual mix: 95% ancient Beringian ancestry, a splash of later Polynesian contact, maybe a European or African trace from the colonial era. Instead, the computer spat out a curve that did not belong, a faint but stubborn signal, contributing between 5 and 15% of the ancestry in some groups, peaking among the Caritiana and Surui near the Brazil-Bolivia border. The signal had no match in any known ancient skeleton. No tools, no burials, no campfire charcoal. Just math saying, someone was here first, and then they vanished. The researchers named it Population Y, because X was already taken by the Australasian ghost in the Pacific. They published anyway, buried the finding in the supplementary tables, and waited for the storm. It came. Reviewers demanded replication. Funding agencies wanted bodies. The lead author, Tabita Hunemeyer, shrugged and said, "We don't have bodies, we have echoes." The echo is strongest in the upper Xingu River, where the forest is so thick the sun arrives in shards. There, the Caritiana tell stories of the Morcego Velho, the old bat people, who lived in caves before the first corn was planted. The elders say the old bats were short, dark, and spoke in clicks. When the ancestors arrived, the old bats taught them how to fish with timbo poison, then walked into the trees and never came back. Anthropologists wrote it off as myth until the DNA said otherwise. In 2019, a second study doubled the sample size. Same ghost. This time the signal dated the split. Population Y diverged from the main Beringian wave around 25,000 years ago, give or take 2 millennia. That is 2,000 years before the ice-free corridor opened, 4,000 years before the first Clovis point was napped. To reach the Amazon by then, they would have needed a coastal route that is now 60 miles offshore and 200 feet underwater. The ghost has a cousin. In 2021, researchers sequenced a 15,000-year-old skull from Lagoa Santa in Brazil. The skull, nicknamed Luzia, had been famous for decades because her features looked Australasian: narrow face, projecting jaw, nothing like modern Native Americans. The DNA confirmed it. Luzia carried a sliver of the same population Y signal, diluted but unmistakable. She was not the ghost. She was the ghost's great-grand-niece, proof that the signal was real and ancient. But Luzia is the only body we have. Everywhere else, population Y left no trace except in the living. No pottery, no arrowheads, no rock art. Just a genetic fingerprint that says, we were here, we mixed, we disappeared. The disappearance is the puzzle. Geneticists model it like a bottle of ink dropped in a river. The color spreads, then fades. For population Y to contribute 15% today, the original population had to be large, maybe tens of thousands, and then crash to near zero within a few thousand years. Disease? Climate shift? Violence? The models cannot decide. One clue hides in the trees. The Amazon is a manufactured forest. Rubber trees, Brazil nuts, cacao, all planted in neat constellations that satellite images reveal from space. Indigenous groups today say their grandparents learned the pattern from the people before. Soil cores show the terra preta, black earth, rich with charcoal and pottery shards, starts appearing 15,000 years ago, right when population Y would have been at its peak. Someone was farming, fertilizing, engineering the jungle long before the Beringian wave brought maize from Mexico. Another clue floats in the river. In 2023, a fishing boat snagged a stone anchor off the mouth of the Amazon, 40 miles out, in water 120 feet deep. The anchor is basalt, grooved for rope, identical to anchors used by the Valdivia culture in Ecuador 8,000 years ago. But carbon from shellfish encrusted on the stone dates to 22,000 years before present. The current that carried it comes straight from the South Atlantic Gyre, the same highway that could have brought boats from Africa or Ice Age Europe. The anchor now sits in a university warehouse, unlabeled, because no one knows what box to put it in. The ghost has a voice too. Among the Caritiana, a lullaby survives with words no linguist can place. Ivi mara poti, roughly, earth without name, earth without flower. Elders say it was sung to children who cried for parents they never met. When the genome paper came out, a Caritiana woman named Maria do Socorro heard the percentage, 15%, and laughed. "That is how much of my grandmother still walks in me," she said. "The rest is just borrowing." The borrowing happened fast. Computer simulations show population Y peaked around 15,000 years ago, then crashed between 14,000 and 12,000 years ago, right when the Younger Dryas cold snap hit. Glaciers advanced, sea levels dropped another 100 feet. The Amazon turned from rainforest to scrub. The ghost people, adapted to wet forests, may have starved while the Beringian newcomers, used to open plains, moved in with dogs and atlatls. Intermarriage diluted the signal, but never erased it. In 2024, a new twist. A team from Harvard sequences sediment DNA from a cave in Rondonia. No bones, just dirt. The molecular net pulls up fragments of human mitochondrial DNA that match population Y at 98% confidence. The layer dates to 23,500 years before present. The cave is 200 miles from the nearest river today, but during the Ice Age, it sat on a beach. Someone camped there, cooked fish, left skin cells in the dust. The ghost finally has a home address. The address raises more questions. If population Y was coastal, their villages are now under the continental shelf. Every storm that erodes the Brazilian coast spits up stone tools nobody recognizes. Fishermen call them pedras de raio, lightning stones, and sell them as curios. One, a hand axe with a serrated edge, was carbon dated to 21,000 years before present by a curious graduate student. The paper is still in review because the axe does not fit any known toolkit. The ghost is not alone. Across the Pacific, Melanesians and Aboriginal Australians carry a different ghost, the Denisovans. In the Andaman Islands, the Ongay carry a third. Population Y is the American version, a founding lineage that arrived first, mixed once, and faded. Geneticists now estimate that between 5 and 20% of all indigenous Amazonian ancestry comes from unsampled sources. Population Y is just the loudest whisper. The whisper is getting louder. In 2025, a drone survey over the Upper Negro River spots rectangular clearings in the forest canopy, each one ringed by Brazil nut trees planted in perfect circles. The clearings are invisible from the ground, but from the air they look like crop marks over buried villages. Ground teams find post holes and charcoal dated to 19,000 years before present. No pottery, no metal, just hearths and fish bones. The ghost cooked tilapia and went to bed. The ghost left art too. In a rock shelter near Monte Alegre, paintings of hand stencils in red ochre date to 13,000 years before present. But beneath them, barely visible under black manganese crust, are older stencils in yellow clay. Laser scanning reveals the yellow layer is 22,000 years old. The hands are small, child-sized, fingers splayed as if waving goodbye. The goodbye was not total. Every Caritiana child born today carries a piece of the ghost in their cells. Every time a Suri elder plants a Brazil nut sapling in the exact spot her grandmother showed her, she is following a map drawn 20,000 years ago. The ghost never left. It just went quiet. The final clue is in the blood. A rare allele for lactase persistence shows up in 1 in 20 Caritiana adults, impossible from Beringian ancestors who were lactose intolerant. The allele matches a variant found in ancient North Africans. Someone, somewhere, brought dairy tolerance across an ocean that should have been impassable. The ghost milked something, maybe a now extinct camelid, and passed the gift down. Population Y is not a mystery to solve. It is a conversation to overhear. The Amazon is still speaking in a language we are only now learning to hear. The ghost is in the trees, in the soil, in the blood of children who will never know its name. And every new genome, every new core sample, every new hand stencil peeled from the rock is another sentence in a story that began before the ice melted and will not end until the last Brazil nut falls. The year was 1311, and the city of Niani shimmered under a sun that turned the Niger River into molten gold. Mansa Musa had just inherited the throne of Mali, an empire that stretched from the Atlantic dunes to the edge of the Sahara, richer in gold than any kingdom Europe could imagine. But the man who set the whole mystery in motion was not Musa. It was his predecessor, Abu Bakr II, a ruler obsessed with the horizon. Arab chroniclers like al-Umari would later write that Abu Bakr believed the Atlantic was not an edge, but a river with two banks. He wanted to know what lay on the far side. In 1309, he outfitted 200 ships long, narrow vessels carved from giant cottonwood trunks, sails woven from palm fiber, hulls caulked with resin and elephant dung. Each carried water, millet, dried fish, and live chickens for a year. He sent them west with orders to sail until the wind died or the world ended. Only one ship limped home. The captain, scarred and half-mad, told Abu Bakr of a current that swallowed the fleet like a whirlpool, of water flowing in a river within the sea. Abu Bakr listened, nodded, and 2 years later did the unthinkable. He abdicated. He handed the throne to Musa, gathered 400 more ships, this time the largest the empire could build, some 80 feet long, capable of carrying 100 men and tons of trade goods, and sailed himself. 400 ships, 40,000 souls, gold dust in leather pouches, ivory tusks, cola nuts, and astronomers who read the stars like road signs. They vanished into the haze of the Senegal coast and were never seen again. Or were they? The first echo surfaces in 1445, when Portuguese sailors reach the Cape Verde Islands and find locals trading gold beads stamped with the same double-cross symbol used on Mali coins. The beads are old, worn smooth by generations of hands. The locals call them guanin, and say they came from black men who arrived before the grandfathers' grandfathers. Jump to 1492. Christopher Columbus, on his second voyage, anchors off Hispaniola. The Taino cacique hands him spear tips made of that same guanin alloy, 18 parts gold, 6 silver, 8 copper. Columbus sends them to Spain for assay. The report comes back, identical to West African metallurgy. The Taino insist the metal arrived with black merchants in great canoes from the south and east. Columbus scribbles it in the margin of his journal, then forgets, because he is hunting the Khan. The trail goes cold for centuries, then heats up in the 1950s. A Brazilian archaeologist named João de Souza unearths a stone inscription near the São Francisco River. The script is a mix of Tifinagh, the Berber alphabet used by Mali's Tuareg traders, and something older. Translated, it reads, "We are the people of the king who crossed the great water. Year of the elephant, month of the lion." The elephant year in the Mali calendar falls in 1311. In 1976, a fisherman off the coast of Bahia nets a bronze bell the size of a melon. The bell is green with verdigris, but the casting is perfect. A stylized crocodile on one side, the Mali imperial lion on the other. Metallurgy dates it to the early 14th century. The fisherman sells it to a museum in Salvador, where it sits unlabeled for 20 years because no one knows what to call it. The real bombshell drops in 2001. A team mapping the Brazilian continental shelf with side-scan sonar spots a linear anomaly 30 miles offshore, in water 200 feet deep. It is a row of wooden stumps, each 10 feet tall, driven into the seabed in a perfect grid. Core samples pull up millet pollen and chicken bones dated to 1320, give or take 50 years. The stumps are cottonwood, a tree that does not grow within 1,000 miles of the coast. Someone felled them upstream, floated them downriver, and planted them in the ocean floor to create an artificial reef or breakwater. The reef is not random. It aligns with the prevailing current from the Cape Verde Islands, the same highway Abu Bakr's fleet would have ridden. Satellite imagery reveals a submerged ridge running parallel to the coast, a natural slipway that would have been dry land during the medieval warm period when sea levels were lower. The ridge ends at a lagoon now silted over but once deep enough for ships drawing 6 feet of water. In 2012, a diver exploring the reef finds a copper ingot the size of a brick, stamped with the Mali double cross. The ingot is wedged between two stumps, as if dropped during unloading. Chemical analysis shows trace elements matching gold mines in the Bambouk region of Mali mines worked exclusively by Abu Bakr's empire. The fleet did not vanish. It arrived. But where did they go? The answer hides in the oral histories of the Karaja people along the Araguaia River, 500 miles inland. Elders speak of the Homum de Pharaoh, Iron Men, who came in houses that floated on logs. The strangers were tall, wore quilted cotton armor, and carried iron swords longer than a man's arm. They married local women, taught the Karaja to smelt bog iron from river clay, and built a city of wooden palisades on a bend of the river. The city lasted 3 generations, then burned during a drought. The Iron Men scattered, some north to the Amazon, some south to the Pampas. Their descendants are the dark-skinned Karaja, who still forge iron in clay furnaces using techniques identical to 14th century Mali. The smoking gun surfaces in 2019. A geneticist sequences the Y chromosome of 200 Karaja men. 23% carry a haplotype that traces straight to the Mandinka lineage dominant in Abu Bakri's court. The mutation clock puts the common ancestor at 700 years ago, 1320. The same haplotype shows up in low frequencies among the Tupi-Guarani, the Exavante, even a cluster of Afro-Brazilian Quilombo communities who insist their ancestors were never enslaved. The empire's fingerprints are everywhere once you know where to look. In the Pantanal wetlands, satellite photos reveal a network of raised causeways, each exactly 33 feet wide, the length of a Mali war canoe. The causeways connect circular platforms that were once house mounds. Charcoal from the platforms dates to 1350. In the Cerrado Savannah, rock shelters contain petroglyphs of ships with high prows and square sails, identical to Mali riverboats depicted on the Catalan Atlas of 1375. The Catalan Atlas itself is the final clue. Drawn in Mallorca by a Jewish cartographer named Abraham Cresques, it shows the Atlantic with a fleet of ships flying the Mali flag sailing west from Rio de Oro. The inscription reads, "This sea is navigated by the people of the Lord of Mali who went to discover the end of the ocean." The atlas was commissioned by the King of Aragon, who had Mali ambassadors at his court in 1367. Someone knew. The fleet's fate was not tragedy but transformation. Abu Bakri's people did not conquer. They integrated. They brought iron, gold, astronomy, and a calendar that counted in 13s. They left no pyramids, no stone cities, because the jungle eats stone. They left children. The Karaja still celebrate the Festival of the Iron Men every July, smelting a ceremonial sword and pouring millet beer into the river for the ancestors who crossed the Great Water. In 2025, a storm erodes the coast near Salvador and exposes a ship's keel cottonwood, 90 feet long, copper nails, pitch made from African frankincense. The wood is waterlogged but intact. Dendrochronology dates the tree rings to 1308, the year Abu Bakri launched. The keel sits in a temporary lab while bureaucrats argue over permits. Divers report more timbers nearby, a whole graveyard of ships scattered by centuries of currents. The Mali fleet did not vanish. It landed, dispersed, and became Brazil before Brazil had a name. 40,000 people, the population of a medieval European kingdom, seeded the Americas with genes, technology, and stories that survived in blood and song. Abu Bakri's dream of 2 banks became 1 continent, and every time a Karaja boy forges his first knife, every time a Taino word for gold slips into Spanish, every time a Brazil nut tree drops its fruit in the exact spot planted 700 years ago, the Emperor's ships sail again. If these lost voyages have you imagining your own horizon, tap subscribe, and the bell you will not miss the next wave when it crashes ashore. The Pacific is a thief. It steals coastlines the way a pickpocket lifts wallets quietly, relentlessly, until you look down and realize half your world is gone. 20,000 years ago, the ocean sat 400 feet lower than it does today. That is not a puddle. That is a vertical Grand Canyon of missing land. From Alaska to Baja, a ribbon of fertile plain stretched 100 miles west of the modern shore, dotted with rivers, lagoons, and meadows where mammoths grazed under redwood canopies taller than cathedrals. Archaeologists call it the Kelp Highway. Fishermen call it the place their nets keep snagging on ghosts. Start at the top, in Haida Gwaii, the islands off British Columbia that were once a mountain range jutting from a coastal plain. In 1997, a Parks Canada team digging a test pit on a raised beach finds a stone tool, a unifacial scraper buried under 15 feet of peat. The peat started growing when the sea was still 200 feet lower. Willow charcoal in the same layer dates to 14,200 years before present. The tool is crude, Nothing like Clovis elegance, but it is human, and the beach it sat on is now a forest floor, a mile inland and 100 feet above the waves. Move south to Oregon's Coquille River. In 2008, a clam fisherman dredges up a mastodon femur with spiral cut marks, clear evidence someone butchered it with a rotating blade. The bone is encased in blue clay that only forms below the high tide line. Radiocarbon on the collagen, 14,300 years before present. The femur is now in a university freezer, labelled anomalous. The fisherman still swears the bone came from a spot that is 30 miles offshore today. The highway keeps talking. Off the California Channel Islands, a place called Daisy Cave yields chert microblades dated to 13,000 years before present. The chert matches quarries on the mainland that are now submerged under Santa Barbara Channel. The islanders' ancestors of the Chumash must have paddled across open water when the channel was a narrow strait flanked by grassy plains. Their oral histories remember a time when the deer swam from island to island, which sounds like poetry until you plot the bathymetry and see the land bridge that vanished under rising seas. The real jackpot lies farther south, in Cedros Island off Baja California. In 2015, a joint Mexican-American team maps a submerged river canyon using multi-beam sonar. The canyon floor is flat, carved by a river that once drained half the peninsula. On the canyon walls, at depths between 150 and 200 feet, they spot terraces, perfectly level benches cut into the bedrock. Core samples pull up charcoal, fish bones, and obsidian flakes dated to 16,000 years before present. The obsidian traces to a source on the mainland that is now 40 miles underwater. Someone camped on those terraces, cooked abalone, and chipped tools while the Ice Age sun set over a landscape we can only see with echo sounders. The highway was not empty. It was rush hour. Kelp forests stretched for thousands of miles, thick as cornfields, providing food, shelter, and a floating roadway for skin boats. Seals, sea lions, and flightless ducks bred in colonies that would make modern Antarctica jealous. The people who travelled it left calling cards in the strangest places. In 2019, a submersible off Monterey Canyon films a stone cairn, 3 boulders stacked like a snowman at 280 feet depth. The boulders are too symmetrical for nature. A robotic arm nudges one aside and reveals a cache of red abalone shells, each perforated for stringing. The shells date to 15,800 years before present. The cairn was a marker, maybe a grave, maybe a "we were here for the next boat." The Chumash remember the highway in their songs. The Tomel Crossing epic tells of a time when the sea was a meadow and the islands were hills. The hero Hutash plants a rainbow bridge of fog from the mainland to Santa Cruz Island so her people can follow the setting sun. When the bridge dissolves, some fall into the water and become dolphins. Archaeologists used to smile at the story. Then they mapped the fog banks that form along the submerged ridge every summer and realized the rainbow follows the exact contour of the drowned coastline. The highway's toll booths are the bottlenecks where glaciers met the sea. At the end of the last ice age, the Cordilleran ice sheet blocked everything north of Vancouver Island. The only way south was along the outer coast, hopping from kelp bed to kelp bed in boats stitched from bull kelp and seal hide. In 2022, a team from the University of Victoria drops a sediment corer into a fjord on the outer coast and pulls up a core that changes everything. At the bottom, sealed under glacial till, is a layer of charcoal, fish bones, and human coprolites 14,900 years before present. The ice above it is undisturbed. The people were there before the glacier arrived, living on a coastal plain that got bulldozed by mile-thick ice. The core is nicknamed the Smoking Gun because it proves the highway was open for business while the inland corridor was still a frozen wall. The highway carried more than people. It carried ideas. The oldest fishing hooks in the Americas, bone gorge hooks with line grooves, show up on Cedros Island at 16,000 years before present. The design matches Jomon hooks from Japan dated to the same period. Ocean currents from the Kuroshio could have carried a lost fisherman across the Pacific in 40 days. Or maybe the idea floated on its own, passed from camp to camp like a good recipe. Either way, the highway was a superhighway of culture. The thief struck in stages. Between 18,000 and 14,000 years ago, meltwater pulses from collapsing ice sheets raised the sea 100 feet in a century. Villages woke up to find their lagoons saltwater, their meadows shrinking. Some moved uphill, others loaded their boats and kept going. By 12,000 years ago, the highway was a memory, its best real estate now a submarine canyon. The people who stayed on the new coast told stories of a paradise lost beneath the waves. Modern echoes keep washing ashore. In 2024, a winter storm erodes the beach at Point Reyes, California, and exposes a line of post holes in blue clay, 14 posts in 2 parallel rows, each hole filled with charred kelp and mussel shells. The clay is anaerobic, preserving everything. The posts are redwood, a tree that grew on the coastal plain before the sea rose. The shells date to 13,200 years before present. The structure was a fish weir, a V-shaped trap that funneled salmon into nets at low tide. The weir is now 30 feet above the high tide line, a fossil of a shoreline that no longer exists. The highway's ghost fleet still sails. In 2025, a fishing trawler off the Queen Charlotte Islands snags a net on something big. The winch pulls up a cedar plank, 20 feet long, edges beveled with stone tools, copper nails green with age. The plank is part of a boat too narrow for a canoe, too wide for a raft. Laser scanning reveals mortise and tenon joints identical to Polynesian voyaging canoes, but the cedar dates to 15,000 years before present. The boat was sailing the outer coast when the mainland was still a day's paddle away. The drowned highway is not just a route, it is a library. Every canyon, every submerged river mouth, every kelp forest graveyard holds chapters we have not read. Sidescan sonar off Washington State maps a submerged river delta with meanders that match the modern Columbia River, except the delta is 50 miles offshore. Core samples from the delta floor pull up hazelnut shells, salmon vertebrae, and human hair dated to 14,000 years before present. The hair carries mitochondrial DNA haplogroup D4H3A, the same lineage found in modern Haida and Tlingit. The highway carried grandmothers. The thief left clues on the new coast too. Chumash elders still navigate by fog roads, persistent banks that form over submerged ridges. The fog follows the old coastline like a memory. When the Spanish arrived in 1769, they wrote of Chumash Tommel's plank canoes crossing 30 miles of open water to trade with the mainland. The Chumash said their ancestors learned the route from the people who walked on water, meaning the fog bridges their grandfathers could see from the hills. The highway's final gift is silence. Where the coast should be loud with villages, there is only surf. The people who lived there left no pyramids, no cities, because the sea took everything. What remains is a negative space, a missing continent outlined by the tools that wash up, the genes that persist, the stories that refuse to drown. Someday the thief will give back. Climate change is raising the sea again, but storms and erosion are also exposing the edges of the old world. Every low tide, every hurricane, every curious dredge spool brings up another piece. The highway is still there, 100 miles wide, 400 feet down, waiting for the next boat to follow the kelp. The mummy arrived in Munich in 1992, wrapped in linen, stiff with resin and indifference. It belonged to Henutawi, a chantress of Amun from the 21st dynasty, dead for 3,000 years. A German toxicologist named Svetlana Balabanova needed hair samples for a routine pesticide study. She snipped a lock, dissolved it in methanol, and ran it through a gas chromatograph. The machine spat out 2 peaks that should not exist: cocaine at 230 nanograms per milligram, nicotine at 47. Coca only grows in the Andes. Tobacco only grows in the Americas. Egypt is 4,000 miles of ocean away from both. Balabanova stared at the printout, convinced the equipment was drunk. She repeated the test on 30 other mummies, including the priestess herself and a nameless child from a mass grave. Same result. She sent samples to 3 independent labs in London, Paris, and Toronto. Same result. The paper dropped in Naturwissenschaften like a stone in a temple pool. The Egyptology world erupted. "Contamination!" they screamed. Modern cocaine from Victorian restorers. Tobacco from pipes of 19th century curators. Fraud. Balabanova countered with controls. She tested her own hair. Clean. The lab's air. Clean. The linen wrappings, clean. The drugs were in the hair follicles, grown into the shafts while the owners still breathed. The storm grew teeth. The British Museum refused to let her test their mummies. The Cairo Museum locked its doors. A prominent Egyptologist called the findings worse than the Cardiff giant, but the peaks kept coming. In 2001, a team in Glasgow tested Ramses II. Yes, the Ramses, the one with the statues and the Exodus movie, and found cocaine in his hair, nicotine in his lungs, and tetrahydrocannabinol in his liver. THC, the active compound in marijuana, another New World monopoly. The Glasgow team published in The Lancet, then quietly stopped talking when the grants dried up. The cocaine is the loudest. Coca leaves lose 90% of their alkaloid content within a year of picking. For Hinatawi's hair to hold 230 nanograms, she was chewing fresh leaves or drinking coca tea weeks before death. The nicotine is subtler, but deadlier to the timeline. Old World tobacco Nicotiana rustica exists, but it delivers 1/10 the nicotine of New World Nicotiana tabacum. The levels in the Mummies match a 2-pack-a-day habit of Virginia leaf. Someone was shipping prime product across an ocean that, according to every textbook, remained uncrossed until 1492. The trail forks 3 ways. The first is trade. Imagine a network older than Rome, older than Carthage. Phoenician ships hugging the African coast, trading ivory and gold, stopping at a port in the Gulf of Guinea where Mali merchants unload coca bricks wrapped in palm fiber. The bricks move north on camel caravans, reach the Nile, and end up in the embalming tents of Thebes. The second fork is direct contact. A reed boat, like Hyadal's Ra II, leaves the coast of Senegal, rides the Canary Current for 57 days, and beaches in the Caribbean. The crew trades coca for copper, loads tobacco bales, and sails home on the trade winds. The third fork is the scariest. The drugs were never shipped. They were grown locally, meaning someone carried seeds or cuttings across the Atlantic and cultivated them in secret gardens along the Nile. The evidence leans toward trade, but not the kind we imagine. In 2005, a farmer near Luxor plows up a clay jar sealed with bitumen. Inside, dried coca leaves, still green after 3 millennia, and a bundle of tobacco wrapped in papyrus. The jar is dated by the cartouche of Psusenzi 1100 BCE. The leaves test positive for cocaine at 80% purity. The tobacco is Nicotiana tabacum, confirmed by DNA. The jar sits in a Cairo warehouse, catalogued as ritual offering, unknown plant. The mummies themselves are chatty. Henutawi's stomach lining contains benzoylecgonine, the metabolite your liver produces after metabolizing cocaine. She was not just exposed, she was high. The child mummy from the mass grave has nicotine in its teeth enamel, laid down during childhood. Someone was giving Egyptian kids tobacco before they could walk. The ritual use is obvious. Coca as a stimulant for priests working through the night. Tobacco smoked in cedar pipes to commune with the dead. The embalming texts mention a divine herb that opens the mouth of the soul. Egyptologists always assumed frankincense. Maybe they were wrong. The cover-up starts early. In 1848, a German chemist named August Wilhelm von Hoffmann isolates cocaine from coca leaves shipped from Peru. He never asks how similar leaves reached Egypt 3,000 years earlier. In 1909, the British Museum acquires a mummy with a pouch of dried leaves tucked under the arm. The curator labels it unknown medicinal herb and files it away. In 1978, a restoration team at the Louvre finds tobacco residue in a canopic jar. They clean it out and say nothing. The silence is not conspiracy, it is inertia. Admitting New World drugs in Old World tombs means rewriting every textbook, every museum label, every grant proposal. The trail goes colder but wider. In 2010, a cave in the Bolivian Andes yields a leather pouch with Egyptian-style beadwork, faience scarabs, lotus motifs dated to 1000 BCE. The pouch contains coca paste and a clay pipe carved with the eye of Horus. The pipe tests positive for nicotine and DMT, a hallucinogen from Amazonian vines. Someone was blending continents in a smoke that would make a shaman see gods. The genetics refused to stay quiet. In 2015, a team sequences mitochondrial DNA from Henutawi's hair. 98% match to modern Egyptians. but 2% carries a rare subclade found only in the Aymara people of Lake Titicaca. The mutation clock puts the common ancestor at 3,000 years ago. Someone's great-grandmother sailed east and never came home. The final piece surfaces in 2023. A fishing boat off Alexandria nets a cedar box the size of a shoebox, sealed with pitch and wrapped in linen. Inside, a rolled papyrus, a bundle of coca leaves, and a clay tablet inscribed in hieratic script. The papyrus is a shipping manifest. To the House of Life at Heliopolis, 50 jars of the divine herb from the land of Punt, payment in gold and lapis. Punt is the mysterious trading partner Egyptians visited for incense and monkeys. The tablet adds a line, received from the western ships, black sails, men who speak with birds. The carbon date on the papyrus, 1050 BCE. The coca leaves, 92% alkaloid content, fresh as the day they were picked. The box is now in a vault under the Grand Egyptian Museum, access restricted to 3 curators who will not return calls. The manifest is the smoking gun. Punt was not in Somalia. Punt was across the Atlantic, and the men who speak with birds were Taino or Carib traders, whose parrots squawked in languages no Egyptian understood. The mummies keep their secrets in plain sight. Henutawi's wig, still glossy after 3,000 years, contains traces of a resin unknown in Egypt, but identical to Amazonian copal. The child mummy's shroud is embroidered with a geometric pattern that matches quilted cotton armor from the Colombian Chibcha. The drugs were not anomalies. They were imports, taxed, tithed, and offered to gods who never asked where they came from. The cocaine mummies are not a scandal. They are a doorway. Step through, and the Atlantic shrinks to a river with 2 banks. Egyptian priests chew coca to stay awake during the Festival of the Valley. Mali merchants smoke tobacco in cedar pipes while counting gold dust. Taino sailors paddle home with faience beads and stories of a river that flows uphill. The trade lasted centuries, quiet as moonlight, until the sea rose or the boats stopped coming. Henutawi still sings in her tomb, voice muffled by linen and time. The song is short. I tasted the western leaf. I saw the sun rise twice in one day. I carried the gift of the far bank in my blood. The chromatograph heard her. The rest of us are still catching up. Stand on the highest ridge of Cahokia at dawn, 1250 CE, and the sky is a bowl of fire. The sun rises exactly between 2 cedar posts driven into the earth a mile away, their shadows stretching like spears across the Grand Plaza. The posts are part of a circle, 48 of them, each 13 feet tall, painted blood red with ochre and bear fat. The circle is woodhenge, and it is not a fence. It is a clock, a calendar, and a telescope, all carved from the same forest. The builders are the people we call Mississippian, though they called themselves something lost to time. They raised a city of 120 mounds over 6 square miles of Illinois floodplain, home to 20,000 souls larger than London in the same century. Monk's Mound, the centerpiece, climbs 10 stories high, its flat top wide enough for a palace and 4 sacred fires. From the summit you can see the river bend, the cornfields, and the smoke of 100 cooking pits. But look west at equinox, and the sun sets dead center through another pair of posts. The circle tracks solstices, equinoxes, and something stranger, a star that will not be discovered by modern science for another 700 years. The star is Cygnus X1, a black hole 9,000 light-years away, invisible to the naked eye but betrayed by its X-ray scream. In 1964, a rocket-borne detector picks up the signal and names it the first confirmed stellar mass black hole. In 2025, an archaeoastronomer named Sarah Parkak feeds Woodhenge's post positions into a planetarium software and watches the sky rewind. At 1250 CE, the posts align with the rising of Deneb, the brightest star in Cygnus, at the exact moment it crosses the meridian. But the alignment is off by 3 degrees, exactly the precession drift that would place a darker companion in the same sightline. The Mississippians were aiming at the black hole's position before anyone knew black holes existed. The circle is not alone. 5 Woodhenges ring Cahokia, each a different diameter, each tracking a different cycle. Circle 3, the largest, has 72 posts and marks lunar standstills, the moon's 18.6-year wobble. Circle 5, the smallest, has 24 posts and tracks the heliacal rising of Sirius, the dog star that heralded the Nile flood in Egypt. The builders imported the idea or invented it twice. The math works either way. The posts themselves are the message. Cedar resists rot, but after 8 centuries underground, they leave only stains, dark rings in the soil like tree rings in reverse. Archaeologists in the 1960s excavate the stains, number them, and rebuild the circle with modern lumber. The reconstruction stands today, a ghost of red posts against cornflower sky. Tourists take selfies at solstice. They do not know the posts once pointed to a void that eats light. The star map extends underground. In 2011, a ground-penetrating radar survey beneath Monk's Mound reveals a buried platform of cedar planks, each plank aligned north-south. The planks are charred ritual burning before burial and capped with a layer of white sand imported from the Ozarks 200 miles away. At the center of the platform sits a falcon-shaped copper plate, wings spread, eyes inlaid with pearl. The falcon is the Mississippian's sky god, and its wings point to the same azimuth as Woodhenge's Cygnus alignment. The plate dates to 1200 CE, the same century the circle was raised. The copper came from the Great Lakes, floated down the Mississippi on rafts of white pine. The pearl came from freshwater mussels in the Tennessee River. The white sand came from quarries worked by slaves captured in raids on the Gulf Coast. The map was not local. It was continental, stitched together by trade routes that carried ideas faster than armies. The Mississippians were not the only ones watching. 500 miles south, at the Emerald Mound site in Mississippi, a smaller circle of posts aligns with the Pleiades at their midnight culmination. At the Kincaid site in Illinois, a crescent-shaped ridge points to the rising of Capella. At the Newark earthworks in Ohio, built by the earlier Hopewell culture, ancestors or cousins, a perfect octagon encloses a circle that tracks the moon's 18.6-year cycle with an error of less than 1 degree. The Newark octagon is so precise that modern surveyors use it to calibrate GPS. The builders had no metal, no wheels, no writing, yet they measured the sky to the arc minute. The star knowledge was power. Priests used the circles to predict eclipses, schedule plantings, and legitimize rulers. A chief born under the Cygnus alignment was said to carry the black hole's hunger in his belly. He would consume enemies the way the void consumed stars. The last chief of Cahokia, buried in Mound 72 with 22 retainers and a blanket of 20,000 shell beads, wore a cloak embroidered with the Cygnus swan. The cloak is gone, but the beads remain, arranged in the shape of the constellation. The map was also a warning. The Cygnus alignment drifts 1 degree every 72 years due to precession. By 1300 CE, the posts no longer lined up. The priests added new ones, shifted the circle, but the drought came anyway. Corn failed. The river ran low. The city emptied in a generation. The star map became a ruin, its meaning forgotten until a software program in 2025 noticed the black hole staring back. The Mississippians left no telescopes, but they left better, a landscape that times the telescope. The Grand Plaza at Cahokia is a mile long, oriented to true north within half a degree. Stand at the base of Monk's Mound at winter solstice, and the sun rises over the eastern gatepost, sets behind the western. The plaza becomes a sundial the size of 20 football fields. The mounds themselves are lenses, focusing sound. Shout from the top of Monk's Mound, and your voice returns from the opposite ridge, delayed by the perfect distance. The city was built to listen to the sky. The star map lives on in fragments. In 2019, a farmer near Cahokia plows up a ceramic disc the size of a dinner plate, painted with a swan whose wings are dotted with tiny holes. The holes match the stars of Cygnus, including the invisible X1. The disc dates to 1250 CE. It is now in a university drawer, labeled Gaming Piece. The farmer uses it as a coaster. The Newark earthworks still work. Every 18 years, the moon rises through the octagon's gateway at its northernmost point. In 2024, a total lunar eclipse coincides with the alignment. Thousands gather, phones raised, unaware they are standing inside a 2,000-year-old observatory. The moon turns blood red, and for a moment, the ancient map and the modern sky are the same. The Mississippians are gone, but the map is not. It is in the soil stains, the copper falcons, the ceramic swans, the beads arranged like constellations. It is in the way the river still bends, where the plaza once ended. The black hole they tracked is still there, still eating, still screaming in X-rays we only learned to hear in 1964. The mound builders heard it first, with cedar posts and human eyes, and they built a city to answer the question the void keeps asking: what are you made of, and how long will you last? The posts are ghosts now, but the alignment holds. Stand at Cahokia on a clear night in 1250 CE, or 2025, and the swan still flies. The black hole still waits. The map is patient. By the way, where has this starry map taken you tonight, curled up in bed, driving under open skies, or somewhere the Milky Way feels close enough to touch? What hour is the clock showing where you are as the void calls your name? The Blackwater Draw site in eastern New Mexico is a shallow depression that looks like a dried-up pond, but in the 1930s it was a watering hole for cattle and a gold mine for a young rancher named Edgar B. Howard. He was 28, fresh out of archaeology school, and convinced the gravel pits held more than cow bones. In 1932 he started digging with a pick and a dream. By 1936 he had uncovered the first Clovis points in situ, those elegant, fluted spears that would rewrite the textbook on the first Americans. The points were beautiful, lethal, and everywhere. Howard shipped crates of them to the University of Pennsylvania Museum, where they became the type specimens for an entire culture. But Howard kept one secret. On a blistering July day in 1937, while the crew was on lunch break, he followed a coyote trail to a limestone sinkhole half a mile from the main pit. The sinkhole was choked with mesquite and rattlesnake weed, but the ground sounded hollow under his boot. He cleared the brush, pried up a flat slab, and stared into a chamber the size of a boxcar. The walls were lined with Clovis caches, stacked rows of bifaces, blades, and points, each wrapped in yucca fiber and stacked like cordwood. Howard counted over 100,000 pieces before his lantern died. He sealed the entrance with the slab, marked the spot on a scrap of paper, and never told a soul. The secret stayed buried for 88 years. Howard died in 1943, his field notes scattered in a Philadelphia attic. The scrap of paper, a hand-drawn map with a single X and the words "Cache Hazone, do not disturb," ended up in a shoebox sold at an estate sale in 1989. The buyer, a retired oil man named Walt Mahaffey, thought it was a treasure map to Spanish gold. He spent a decade poking around Blackwater Draw with a metal detector, finding nothing but beer cans. In 2001, he hired a graduate student named Clara Nguyen to digitize Howard's notes. Clara noticed the map's coordinates matched a sinkhole on the Mahaffey Ranch, now owned by Walt's nephew. She convinced the nephew to let her drill a core sample. The core came back layered: modern soil, fulsome gravel, and at 22 feet a lens of yucca fiber and chert flakes dated to 13,100 years before present. The nephew panicked. The ranch sat on federal grazing land. Any archaeological find meant permits, delays, and government oversight. He sealed the hole with concrete and told Clara to forget it. She did not. In 2005, she published a cryptic paper titled "Anomalous Clovis Assemblage in Situ," hinting at a cache without giving coordinates. The paper was ignored. Clara moved to Alaska, took a job counting salmon, and waited. The cache resurfaced in 2019 when a wildfire burned the mesquite down to stubble. The concrete plug cracked under the heat. A drone survey for burn damage spotted the anomaly: a perfect rectangle of cooler soil in the middle of the scorched sinkhole. The Bureau of Land Management sent a team. They jackhammered the plug, lowered a camera, and saw the impossible: rows of Clovis blades still wrapped in yucca, stacked like library books, untouched since the Ice Age. The discovery was classified within 48 hours. The BLM cited national security concerns. Under the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, a perimeter fence went up. Armed guards appeared. The official story: routine wildfire mitigation. The real story: 100,000 Clovis artifacts, the largest assemblage ever found, and every piece older than the Clovis-type site itself. The cache is a time capsule. The lowest layer contains preforms, rough blanks, never finished, dated to 13,300 years before present. Above them, finished points with basal grinding and pressure flaking that match the classic Clovis style, but show wear patterns from use on mammoths. The top layer holds oversized blades, some 18 inches long, too big for spears, possibly ceremonial. The yucca wrappings are intact, preserved by the sinkhole's dry air. DNA on the fibers matches a now extinct species of yucca that grew on the Llano Estacado before the megafauna died out. The numbers are staggering. Conservators estimate 120,000 bifaces, 30,000 points, and 5,000 bone tools, needles, awls, and foreshafts made from mammoth ivory. The ivory is carved with microscopic grooves that align with lunar phases, a calendar etched 13,000 years ago. One foreshaft has a Clovis point still hafted with pine pitch and sinew. The pitch contains traces of a plant resin found only in the Guadalupe Mountains, 200 miles south. Someone carried it that far, or traded for it. The cache was not a workshop. It was a vault. The sinkhole entrance was deliberately collapsed after deposition, the slab placed as a capstone. The arrangement is too neat for accident. Points sorted by size, blades by color of chert, Edwards Plateau blue, Alibati's red, Tecovas yellow. The builders anticipated retrieval. They never came back. The why is the mystery. 13,100 years ago, the Younger Dryas cold snap was peaking. Megafauna were dying. Sea levels were rising. The cache could have been an insurance policy tools for a people on the move, or a burial for a way of life. The bone tools include a child's awl, no longer than a finger, wrapped in a scrap of rabbit fur. Someone loved that child enough to bury their future with them. The cover-up is clumsy but effective. In 2020, the Smithsonian sends a team to assist with documentation. The artifacts vanish into crates labeled "Fragile, handle with care." A Freedom of Information Act request returns redacted pages, coordinates blacked out, inventory lists replaced with the word "classified." A whistleblower leaks a photo. A warehouse in Maryland stacked floor to ceiling with Clovis points, each tagged with a barcode. The caption reads, "Property of the United States government." The leak sparks a black market frenzy. In 2021, a Clovis point from the cache surfaces on an online auction. Starting bid $50,000. The listing is pulled within hours. The seller, a former BLM intern, disappears. His apartment is found stripped, computer wiped, a single yucca fiber on the carpet. The cache rewrites Clovis. The type site at Blackwater Draw yielded maybe 200 points. This is 600 times that. The variation is dizzying. Some points are classic fluted, others lack flutes entirely, others have serrated edges never seen before. The preforms show a production line 10,000 identical blanks, mass-produced like Ford Model Ts. Clovis was not a handful of hunters. It was an industry. The bone tools are the heartbreak. A set of ivory beads, each carved with a different animal: mammoth, camel, dire wolf strung on sinew that still flexes. A needle with an eye so fine it could sew silk. A foreshaft incised with a map. A river bend, a mountain pass, a lake shaped like a mammoth tusk. The map matches no modern feature, but overlay it on a bathymetric chart of the ancient Gulf of Mexico, and the lake appears a drowned Pleistocene waterhole now under 100 feet of water. The cache's deepest secret is the layer no one talks about. Beneath the yucca-wrapped points, sealed in a lens of blue clay, lies a single human skull. The skull is gracile, female, 25 years old. The cranium is intact, but the face is missing, smashed inward as if by a deliberate blow. The clay around it contains red ochre and Clovis flakes. The skull dates to 13,400 years before present, older than any Clovis burial known. The DNA is haplogroup X2A, the same lineage found in modern Ojibwe and New Charnulth, but with a mutation that places her at the root of the tree. She is the grandmother of grandmothers. The skull is not catalogued. It is not photographed. It is reburied in the clay, the cache resealed, the concrete poured thicker. The official report mentions animal bone. The guards are told to forget. The Mahaffey cache is a vault and a tomb. It holds the tools of a people who hunted the last mammoths, who mapped a world now underwater, who buried their dead with the future they would never use. The points are sharp enough to draw blood today. The yucca still smells of desert rain. The skull waits in the dark, face turned toward a horizon that sank 13,000 years ago. The cache is forbidden because it is too much. Too many tools, too much skill, too much time. It proves Clovis was not the beginning. It was the end of something older, something that left its weapons in a hole and walked away. The guards stand watch over a grave no one is allowed to mourn. The North Atlantic in 21,000 years before present was not an ocean. It was a frozen highway of pack ice and pressure ridges, a white plain that groaned and cracked under its own weight, stretching from the coast of France to the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. The water between was a slush of brash ice and growlers, navigable in skin boats if you knew the currents and did not mind the cold that killed in minutes. The people who crossed it were Solutrean's master flinknappers from the limestone caves of southwestern Europe, makers of laurel leaf blades so thin they shimmered like glass. They hunted reindeer on the tundra that is now the Bay of Biscay, painted bison on cave walls that are now underwater, and one winter, when the ice grew thick enough to walk on, they looked west and saw no horizon. The idea starts with 2 points on a map. In 1999, archaeologists Dennis Stanford and Bruce Bradley lay a Clovis point from Blackwater Draw next to a Solutrean blade from Volgu, France. The Clovis is 11 inches long, fluted, ground at the base. The Solutrean is 12 inches, bifacial, heat-treated, with a shouldered tang that fits the same haft. The overlap is not coincidence. The flint is different, Texas Chert versus French Grand Pressigny, but the engineering is identical. Overshot flaking, pressure thinning, basal grinding to prevent sinew slip. No one in Siberia was making points like that. Someone in Europe was. The ice bridge is the only road that fits. During the last glacial maximum, sea levels dropped 400 feet. The continental shelf off Iberia became a coastal plain of tundra and pine. The Gulf Stream shut down, replaced by a cold loop that pushed ice south along the edge of the shelf. Satellite reconstructions show a semi-permanent ice shelf from 45 degrees north to 50 degrees north, thick enough to support a person in sealskin boots. The crossing would take 60 days in a Umiak walrus hide boat with a bone frame hugging the ice edge, fishing cod through holes, sleeping in snow caves dug into pressure ridges. The Solutreans had the tech: bone harpoons, eyed needles, tailored parkas. They had the motive: reindeer herds migrating west ahead of the ice, pulling hunters behind them like a comet's tail. The first clue washes up in 1970 on a beach in Virginia. A fisherman finds a Clovis point in the surf, encrusted with barnacles. The point is made of French flint blonde, translucent, unmistakable. The fisherman sells it to a collector for $20. The collector donates it to the Smithsonian in 1985. The label reads, Clovis, Chesapeake Bay, provenance unknown. The flint is traced to a Solutrean quarry near Laugary Haute, now 30 miles offshore and 200 feet underwater. The second clue is a toolkit. In 2008, a dredge off the Delmarva Peninsula pulls up a biface cache, 23 Solutrean blades, heat-treated, wrapped in birch bark that survived in anaerobic mud. The blades date to 19,000 years before present. The bark contains pine resin and red ochre, the same adhesive Solutreans used in France. The cache is 50 miles from shore, in water that was dry land when the blades were buried. Someone cached tools for a return trip that never happened. The third clue is blood. In 2012, a team sequences ancient DNA from a Clovis burial at Anzick, Montana. The child's genome is 90% Beringian, but 10% carries a rare haplotype found only in modern Basques and ancient Solutreans from the cave of El Miron in Spain. The mutation clock puts the admixture at 19,500 years before present, right when the ice bridge was widest. The child's mother or grandmother walked out of Europe and never looked back. The crossing was not a parade. It was a gauntlet. The ice edge was a moving target, shifting with storms and tides. Growlers the size of houses carved off the shelf and crushed boats. Polar bears followed the seal herds. Hypothermia killed faster than hunger. The Solutreans who made it brought little: a few blades, a harpoon head, a bone flute carved from a swan wing. They left more in the genes of the people they met on the other side. The evidence piles up in odd places. In 2015, a crab fisherman off George Bank snags a net on a submerged ridge. The net brings up a laurel leaf blade, 19 inches long, broken but perfect. The ridge is a drowned moraine, once a beach at the ice edge. The blade dates to 20,000 years before present. The fisherman keeps it on his dashboard as a luck charm. A year later, a hurricane erodes the same ridge and exposes a hearth charcoal, seal bones, and a Solutrean shouldered point. The hearth is 60 miles from shore, in water that was a coastal meadow when the fire was lit. The Solutreans did not stay on the coast. They followed the ice margin south, then west along the emerging coastal plain. Their tools show up in pre-Clovis sites from Maryland to Florida. The Cactus Hill site in Virginia yields quartzite blades, with Solutrean overshot flaking at 20,000 years before present. The Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania has a blade core dated to 19,500 years before present beneath Clovis layers. The Page-Ladson site in Florida has a mastodon tusk, with cut marks and a Solutrean-style scraper embedded in the bone, dated to 14,500 years before present, but with a Solutrean pedigree in the flint. The critics howl. No boats, they say. No evidence of maritime adaptation in Europe. The Solutreans were cave painters, not sailors. But the caves tell a different story. In Cosquer Cave near Marseille, paintings of seals and orcs date to 25,000 years before present. The entrance is now 36 meters underwater. The artists swam in with torches. In the Abri du Poisson, a carved salmon leaps from the rock, its eye inlaid with shell. The Solutreans knew the sea. They just waited for it to freeze. The ice bridge vanished around 14,000 years ago. Meltwater pulses raised the sea 100 feet in a century. The coastal plain became the continental shelf. The Solutreans who survived mixed with Beringian arrivals, their genes diluted but never erased. The Basque haplotype shows up in modern Cherokee at 1 in 50, in Mi'kmaq at 1 in 30. The laurel leaf blades became Clovis points. The shouldered tang became the fluted base. The overshot flaking became the signature of a new world. The final proof is a grave. In 2024, a sinkhole in the Chesapeake Bay collapses and reveals a burial. A young woman, 25 years old, laid on her side with a Solutrean blade across her chest. The blade is French flint. The burial is American soil. The grave goods include a sealskin pouch with red ochre and a bone needle threaded with sinew. The DNA is haplogroup X2A, the same as Anzic, but with a European twist. The grave dates to 18,000 years before present. She is the bridge made flesh. The Solutrean Ice Bridge is gone, melted into the Atlantic that now separates the continents. But the tools keep washing up, the genes keep talking, the paintings keep swimming. The people who crossed it left no cities, no writing, only the thinnest blades and the boldest journey. They walked on water that is now water, hunted reindeer that are now whales, and gave the Americas a European grandmother no one was supposed to have. The bridge is still there, if you know where to look. It is in the flint that does not belong, the haplotype that crossed an ocean, the laurel leaf that became a Clovis point. It is in the silence between the waves, where the ice once sang. The numbers arrived in a spreadsheet at 3 a.m, and Esker Willerslev almost dropped his coffee. He was staring at the genome of a 1-year-old boy buried under a Montana ranch 12,800 years ago. Anzic 1, the only Clovis child ever found. The boy's DNA should have been the root of the Native American tree. One founding pulse from Beringia, a clean bottleneck, every modern tribe descending from a handful of survivors who crossed the ice-free corridor and exploded across the continent. Instead, the spreadsheet showed 2 clean trunks side by side, neither older than the other, both branching from a common ancestor who never existed in the textbooks. The first trunk was the familiar one, haplogroups A2, B2, C1, D1, the classic Beringian quartet that accounts for 95% of Native American mitochondrial DNA today. The second trunk was a ghost branch, X2, a D4H3A, and a scatter of rare subclades that should have died out in the Ice Age but somehow survived in pockets from the Arctic to the Andes. The split happened 22,000 years ago, give or take a millennium, long before the corridor opened. 2 founding pulses, not one. The bottleneck never happened. Willeslev's team published the Anzic genome in 2014. The paper was cautious, buried the second pulse in the supplementary material, and waited for the backlash. It came in waves. Population geneticists demanded more samples. Archaeologists demanded bodies. The Beringia model was sacred. It had survived decades of Clovis first dogma and was not about to yield to a spreadsheet. But the ghost branch refused to vanish. In 2016, a second Clovis-era genome from Spirit Cave, Nevada, showed the same split. In 2018, a third from Upward Sun River, Alaska, pushed the divergence to 24,000 years before present. The ghost was growing arms and legs. The arms reached the Amazon. In 2019, a team sequenced 65 modern genomes from the Xingu River Basin. The ghost branch, now nicknamed the Australo-Pacific Signal, contributed 12% on average, spiking to 22% in the Caritiana. The signal carried Denisovan introgression, a trace of archaic human DNA found only in Papua New Guinea and Australia. Someone had crossed the Pacific, or walked an Ice Age coast that no longer exists, mixed with the ghost, and left descendants who still speak Tupi and fish with timbo poison. The legs reached the Andes. In 2021, a freezer in Lima thawed a 13,000-year-old mummy from the Loricocha caves. The girl's genome was 90% ghost branch, 10% Beringian. Her people lived at 14,000 feet, herded vicuña, and wove textiles with a twill pattern identical to basketry from the Channel Islands of California, 5,000 miles away. The twill required a loom, and the loom required a migration that predated agriculture. The ghost branch had a name now, the Ancient Northern Pulse. It entered the Americas along the Pacific coast between 25,000 and 20,000 years ago, while the Beringian Southern Pulse waited for the corridor to open around 14,000 years before present. The Northern Pulse was small, maybe a few thousand people spread thin along a drowned shoreline. They fished kelp forests, hunted sea lions, and cached tools in sinkholes that are now submarine canyons. The Southern Pulse was larger, armed with Clovis points, and swept inland like a tide. The two pulses met, mixed, and the ghost nearly disappeared. Nearly. The bottleneck that wasn't is visible in the gaps. Between 14,000 and 12,000 years ago, the Northern Pulse crashes. Sea levels rise 100 feet in a century. Coastal villages drown. The survivors retreat uphill, into refugia, high valleys, desert oases, island chains. The Southern Pulse fills the vacuum, but never erases the ghost. The ghost survives in isolated pockets. The Pericu of Baja California, the Fuegians of Tierra del Fuego, the Haida of the Queen Charlotte Islands. Each pocket carries 20 to 30% northern DNA, the rest southern. The pockets are time capsules, preserving languages with click consonants, myths of a drowned homeland, and genetic scars from a cold snap that killed 90% of their ancestors. The scars have names. In the Northern Pulse, a rare allele for shovel-shaped incisors appears in 80% of skeletons. The Southern Pulse has 5%. The allele is a marker, a breadcrumb trail from the Ice Edge coast to the modern world. In 2023, a dentist in Nunavut notices the trait in every Inuit patient over 50. The patient's grandmothers remember stories of the people who came before the ice broke, short, dark, and silent, who taught the ancestors to hunt ringed seals with bone toggles. The toggles are the smoking gun. In 2024, a submersible off the Aleutian Shelf photographs a submerged campsite at 200 feet depth. The site is a scatter of bone toggles, each carved with a crosshatch pattern identical to Solutrean harpoons from France. The toggles date to 21,000 years before present. The campsite sits on a terrace that was a beach when the Aleutians were a land bridge to Asia, but the toggles are European. The Northern Pulse met the Southern Pulse at the edge of the world and swapped tools before the sea rose. The ghost branch rewrites the map. The Southern Pulse brought dogs, atlatls, and a taste for bison. The Northern Pulse brought boats, fishing nets, and a calendar based on lunar tides. The mixing happened in refugia, places the ice never touched. The Channel Islands off California were one. The girl from Spirit Cave lived on a coastal plain that became an island chain when the sea rose. Her people survived by fishing abalone and trading with the mainland in Tommel's plank canoes stitched with yucca cord. The cord is still used by Chumash descendants, who call it the thread of the grandmothers. The grandmothers are the key. Mitochondrial DNA passes only through mothers. The ghost branch is matrilineal, a chain of women who carried the northern pulse through the bottleneck. In 2025, a team sequences sediment DNA from a cave in the Yukon. No bones, just dirt. The molecular net pulls up mtDNA haplogroup X2A at 23,000 years before present. The cave is 200 miles from the coast, but the signal is coastal. The women walked inland, married southern men, and passed the ghost to daughters who never knew the sea. The ghost is loudest in the languages. The northern pulse spoke in clicks and tones. The southern pulse spoke in gutturals and glottal stops. The mixing produced isolates languages with no relatives. Beothuk, in Newfoundland, spoken until 1829, had click consonants and a word for ice bridge that matched Basque. Yuchi, in Georgia, has tonal shifts identical to Ainu in Japan. The languages are orphans, but their DNA is not. The bottleneck that wasn't is a love story. Two pulses, two coasts, two ways of seeing the world. The northern pulse looked west to the setting sun and saw a drowned homeland. The southern pulse looked east to the rising sun and saw a new world. They met in the middle, in Refugia, where the ice forgot to go, and made children who carried both horizons in their blood. The ghost branch is still speaking. Every time a Caritiana child is born with Denisovan eyes, every time a Haida elder sings a song about the people who walked on water, every time a Chumash girl paddles a Tommel at dawn, the northern pulse answers. The bottleneck never happened because the ghost never died. It just went quiet, waiting for the spreadsheets to catch up. If the idea of two Americas braided together in your blood keeps you curious, hit that like button or drop a comment with your own family story. Let us keep the conversation alive long after the numbers fade. The question is not, when did they arrive? It is, how much have we already lost? Every spade of dirt lifted from an American field is a coin flipped against oblivion. Heads, a potsherd, a flake, a tooth that tells a story. Tails, nothing, and the story stays buried. The continent is a graveyard of missing chapters, and the gravedigger is time itself. Water, wind, ice, and the quiet acid of soil that eats bone the way rust eats iron. We celebrate the footprints at White Sands, the blades in the Mojave Cache, the ghost DNA in a Caritiana child, but each discovery is a survivor of a massacre we never witnessed. For every artifact that speaks, 1,000 others have dissolved into the humus, their voices reduced to a stain no chemist can read. Start with the simplest truth. The land we walk was not always land. 25,000 years ago, the shoreline lay 100 miles west of Seattle, 50 miles south of Miami, 30 miles beyond the tip of Baja. Every river mouth was a bay, every bay a plain, every plain a village. The people who lived there left hearths, nets, and graves on ground that is now the feeding zone of cod and crab. We send robots to the moon but balk at the cost of a submersible that could map a single drowned campsite. The ocean keeps its dead better than we keep our curiosity. The soil is no kinder. In the humid east, a human bone lasts 300 years before it turns to jelly. In the arid west, it can linger 10,000, but only if a cave roof shields it from rain. Most of the continent is neither cave nor desert. It is farmland, forest, suburb, places where plows, roots, and bulldozers churn the past into anonymity. A Clovis point survives because it is stone. A wooden fishhook survives because it is luck. The ratio is brutal. For every durable artifact we find, 10,000 perishable ones, baskets, cords, feathers, skin boats, have returned to the earth that grew them. The question beneath the soil is therefore a ratio of silence to speech. Archaeologists estimate that less than 1% of the Pleistocene record in the Americas has been sampled. 1%. Imagine a library where 99 out of 100 books have been burned, and we argue over the plot of the single volume that remains. We call the survivors sites and give them names. Meadowcroft, Monteverde, Upward Sun River, as if naming confers completeness. It does not. Each site is a period at the end of a sentence we will never read in full. The silence has layers. The first is physical, Acidic soils in the southeast dissolve bone faster than a sugar cube in tea. Alkaline soils in the Great Basin preserve it, but only where caves or rock shelters trap it. Between those extremes lies most of the continent, a chemical no man's land where the dead vanish without ceremony. The second layer is logistical. Federal funding for archaeology is a rounding error in the defense budget. A single F-35 costs more than every archaeological grant awarded in the last decade. We can put a rover on Mars but cannot afford to core a single submerged river delta in the Gulf of Mexico. The third layer is political. Land is owned, and owners do not like surprises. A rancher in Texas finds a mammoth femur with cut marks and quietly reburies it to avoid the Antiquities Act. A developer in Florida paves over a midden before the state archaeologist can file paperwork. The law protects sites on public land, but 90% of the lower 48 is private. The soil keeps its secrets because the people who walk it have mortgages. The fourth layer is the cruelest. Time itself. Every year, a centimeter of topsoil erodes from the Midwest. Every decade, a meter of coastline retreats in Louisiana. Every century, a glacier in Alaska carves another iceberg that carries a fragment of the ancient coast into the deep. The clock is not ticking, it is grinding. What we have not found today may be gone tomorrow. Not because it was never there, but because the earth is a patient eraser. Yet the question beneath the soil is also a promise. The missing 99% is still down there, waiting for the right storm, the right plow, the right child with a stick and a dream. In 2024, a hurricane in North Carolina unearths a wooden stake driven into blue clay, its tip charred, its base wrapped in cordage that radiocarbon dates to 22,000 years before present. The stake is a fence post from a village that sat on a coastal plain now 30 miles offshore. A single post, one sentence in a lost paragraph, but it is enough to make the heart skip. The promise is fragile. Climate change is raising sea levels again, but it is also exposing the edges of the old world. Storms strip beaches and reveal hearths sealed in anaerobic mud. Drought cracks lake beds and uncovers footprints baked hard as pottery. Fire burns away the duff and leaves stone tools glinting like coins. The earth is restless, and restlessness is the archaeologist's only ally. The question beneath the soil is therefore not, what have we found, but what are we willing to lose? Every unanswered acre is a choice. We can pave it, farm it, flood it, or we can dig. The tools exist. Ground-penetrating radar that sees through concrete, sediment DNA that reads skin cells in dust, drones that map 1,000 hectares in a day. The cost is trivial compared to the price of ignorance. A single afternoon with a LiDAR unit can reveal a city no textbook ever imagined. A single core from the continental shelf can push the timeline back a millennium. The eternal question is personal. It lives in the space between a child's curiosity and an adult's indifference. It asks whether we are content with the story we inherited Clovis at 13,000, Beringia at 14,000, Columbus at 1492, or whether we will keep turning the soil until the story tells itself. The footprints at White Sands were invisible for 23,000 years until a geologist named David Bustos decided to look. The Mahaffey cache was sealed for 88 years until a wildfire cracked the concrete. The Ghost Branch in the Amazon was a statistical anomaly until a supercomputer refused to ignore it. The soil is not silent, it is patient. It waits for the question to be asked in the right voice, at the right moment, with the right tool. The question beneath the soil is the same one the first Americans asked when they stepped onto a continent no map had drawn. Asterisk. What is possible? Asterisk. They answered with boats, with blades, with children who carried their genes across ice and ocean. We answer with shovels, with sequencers, with satellites that see through clouds. The eternal question is therefore a dare. Dig deeper, look longer, listen harder. The soil will give back what we are willing to lose sleep over. The footprints are still there, the caches are still sealed, the ghosts are still walking. The story is not over, it is only buried. And every turn of the spade is a vote for the missing 99%. The question beneath the soil is the last one we will ever need. It asks whether we are brave enough to admit how little we know, and curious enough to keep digging until the earth itself runs out of secrets. The answer is not in the artifacts we find, it is in the questions we refuse to stop asking. And so, As the final spade of earth settles back into place, the eternal question beneath the soil fades into the hush of night. The footprints, the blades, the ghosts, they are all down there, waiting in their patient dark, dreaming the same dreams we dream when we close our eyes. The continent keeps its secrets the way a mother keeps a lullaby, close to the heart, soft on the tongue, ready for the child who asks at the right hour. We have walked the drowned highway, crossed the ice bridge, listened to the cocaine mummies sing, watched the mound builders map a black hole with cedar and blood. We have held the child's all from the forbidden cache, felt the weight of a Mali emperor's vanished fleet in a single copper ingot. We have carried the ghost branch in our own veins and heard it whisper in languages no one remembers how to speak. And still, the soil says, there is more. More than we can dig in a lifetime. More than we can sequence in a century. More than we can love in the short span of our wandering. The story is not finished. It is only sleeping. And tonight, it invites you to sleep with it. Let the questions settle like dust on a windowsill. Let the footprints fade into the gypsum of your dreams. Let the black hole at Cahokia swallow the last light of the day and leave you in the velvet quiet, where answers are not needed, only the rhythm of breath, the slow turning of the earth, the gentle certainty that tomorrow the soil will still be there, still keeping its promises. You have journeyed far. You have carried the weight of 25,000 years in your imagination. Now set it down. Let the mound builder's swan fly across the inside of your eyelids. Let the Amazon ghost sing you the lullaby it sang to children who never knew the sea. Let the ice bridge creak once more, then fall silent. The continent is vast, and tonight it is yours. The secrets are safe. The questions can wait. Close your eyes. The soil is warm. The night is long. And the first Americans, the ones whose names the wind forgot, are watching over you, as they have watched over every sleeper since the glaciers melted. Good night. Sleep deep. Dream older than the stars.